Hello and welcome in the newest episode of Before It Is All Gone, which will be very different from all other episodes because we are going to talk about a controversial topic, which is feeding wild animals. So there will be more talk than usual. Sorry about that. And of course, in this episode, more than ever, I would like to hear your opinion. So please leave your comment below. Tell me if you agree with me, if you don't, if you hated my idea, if you loved it. Starting a conversation is always the most important in these kind of topics. And as usual, if you like my videos, do not forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's super important for me. And as you know, if you like it, share it. After last week's episode from the cloud forest, where I included a lot of footage of animals which were coming close to us because of bird feeders and animal feeders, I started to think about this topic, and 1 week passed and I still didn't come up with a definitive answer. Is it okay to feed wild animals or not? And I really think in general there is no good answer. We need to see every single case separate and need to decide if that case is okay, is it bad, or in some cases it can even be good. So let's try to see a couple of examples and let's see if I can more or less explain my opinion. I think in every single case when feeding of wild animals is involved, we need to see three different aspects. One, what is the reason for the feeding? Then the second one, how is the way of the feeding, or how is the feeding happening? Is it respectful, safe, etc.? And the third one is what is the result of the feeding? And obviously these three different aspects will show us if one case is okay or another one not. So let's try to see a few examples. Baiting sharks for science. Okay, so scientists go out with a boat, they're baiting the sharks, they're feeding them or attracting them with food. Then they even catch them. Sometimes they bait them with a big hook. They hook the shark, pull it up to the open deck of the boat to be able to measure it, weight it, how long it is, and also to put specific satellite tags on them. They do this regularly with great white sharks. Obviously, then they release the sharks, and the sharks provide useful information for science. So the reason is trying to protect the animals, right? Gather information for conservation. The way the feeding happens, in this case with the sharks, it's pretty intrusive, aggressive. They even need to take them out of the water, so it's pretty hardcore, we can agree that. But the result is that these sharks are okay, stay healthy, survive, and provide useful information for the long-term conservation of the species. So we can all agree that this kind of feeding of wild animals is accepted. Now let's see another example. We are in a ranch in the forest here in Quintana Roo in Mexico, and we decide, because we heard or we seen some paw marks of jaguars, that we will throw out some food every night. So eventually the jaguar gets used to that there is food all the time around the ranch, and it keeps coming by. So now we have a chance to observe the jaguars at night. Great. But then let's see the three aspects. The reason is probably that we want to see the jaguar. We are curious at the jaguar, so we want to attract it. The way the feeding happens, well, you just leave food out, preferably food which will not hurt the jaguar. Okay, let's say that this is neutral. Maybe the reason is still neutral because we want to see them. That's not bad, not good. But what is the result? The result is that the jaguar gets more habituated to human habitat, and it starts looking for food around this ranch and then the ranch next to it. And at this point, the ranch next to it, they're not interested in seeing the jaguar. They're afraid because they know that the jaguar might kill their cows, their goats. So what happens 1 week later, when the jaguar keeps coming close to other ranches, somebody will go out at night and will shoot the jaguar. So for the result of this feeding is that the jaguar is killed in a human-animal conflict, which was generated, literally fed by the people. So now we can see, if we concentrate on reason of the feeding, how the feeding happens and what is the result, we can more or less decide how each and every case of feeding wild animals will rate. So let's see now some examples in which I was involved in the last 12 years while I'm working with wildlife tours. Let's see the closest one to home, which is the bull shark dives. Here in Playa del Carmen, as you could see on a previous video, which I link here, you can see it up on the screen. We have bull sharks around the area, and there are dive shops which are doing baited dives. That means they go down, they offer the sharks fish head and scraps, which attracts the sharks. You can dive with them, take pictures, and then get out of the water. Let's see the reason. The reason for this is obviously people want to see sharks, and also the reason is to generate money for the dive shops. So we can say that it's a pretty commercial reason, neutral, in some way positive, because obviously generating money to the community is positive. In some ways it's negative. So we could potentially say that it's a neutral reason, but it could be also interpreted as negative, as you want. The way the feeding happens. In some places, the feeding is safer. Like in certain places, they're building a little wall, and behind that are the divers, and the whole encounter is much more controlled, much more safe. Here in Playa del Carmen, it happens in the sand, so it might not be the most controlled way of feeding sharks. So we could say here in Playa del Carmen, the way of the feeding happens, for me, it's not the best, so it can be a little bit negative. But then let's check out the result. The result of feeding the bull sharks is that bull sharks are now protected here in Playa del Carmen. There is a national park which incorporates the bull shark diving as well. Specifically, every single diver needs to pay towards the national park after every dive, and shark fishermen are not allowed to come in and fish out these sharks, which was happening all the time before this happened. So even though the reason might be a gray area, the way of the feeding happens, not perfect, but the result is actually the protection of the species in this area. And also we need to see, do we cause any negative result in the sharks? For example, do we change their overall behavior? Not really, because they're still a migratory species. They come whenever they come. In November, they leave in January, February. Normally the migration seems to be connected to giving birth here in the area. So this is just a pit stop, which actually they already knew before the baited dives, because fishermen used to clean their fish here, and that used to attract these sharks right here to the beaches of Playa del Carmen. So in the big picture, probably baited shark dives are not changing the behavior of the sharks and has no real negative impact. So I would say overall it's definitely a positive result. It's arguable, do you want to dive with the sharks while the bait is in the water or not? Me here in Playa prefer to just dive and see them, but we also know they're around here because of the baited dives. So this is one. There's another one where I'm not that sure if we can state that it's clearly positive, the feeding, and that's the crocodiles in Banco Chinchorro. The situation is very similar in Banco Chinchorro, an offshore reef. Local fishermen used to clean their fishes around their little huts over the water, and crocodiles always went there and ate up the scraps. Now, a while back, a local specialist dive shop managed to get a permit to go there and get in the water with these crocodiles. Now, obviously, there is some baiting going on, so the crocodiles are equally attracted than before by the fishermen, but now you have some people photographing the crocodiles and being in the water. The reason is to get amazing pictures, encounter the animals, maybe share the amazing pictures and videos with the world. I would say reason is mostly neutral, not really negative, not really positive, but it's not an incredibly big, important reason either. The way the feeding happens is actually pretty controlled. There are spotters out, there are people controlling the crocodiles, making sure there are no accidents happening. Only lionfish head and scraps are used, so the crocodiles are not really fed, they just get little snacks. And as the result, I would say it's pretty neutral, because the crocodiles were already protected in that area because it's a national park, so nothing really changes. The crocodiles' behavior didn't change, so I would say it's neutral. The only real positive effect there is that the people who go out there do some dives and they hunt lionfish, which is an invasive species on the reef, and this lionfish is the one which is used for bait. The big part of the lionfish is consumed by the divers as ceviche, and then the remaining scraps are used for bait. So this is a neutral case. Now let's get back to last week's episode to the cloud forest, where we've seen a lot of bird feeders in action, and we also seen that some bananas were used to attract mammals like kinkajou and taira. So what do I think about this case? Let's see the reason. The reason here clearly is to get the animals close enough for tourists to be able to enjoy them. Everybody can decide that if it's neutral or it's negative or positive. Coming from my profession, which is actually organizing wildlife encounters, I myself say that it's a neutral reason. I can't say that it's the greatest reason in the world. It's a pretty first world problem that somebody wants to see an animal species which they didn't see before and then can spend money and do that. But I also don't feel it's negative. So let's say the reason of bird feeders in Ecuador is neutral. Now, it's very important how the feeding is happening. For example, for hummingbirds, the feeders need to be cleaned hourly to make sure that there is no bacteria, no disease, no bugs are in there to protect the birds. It's also important not to have the bird feeders out all day, so the birds are not getting used to this place as a non-stop feeding station, but it's just gonna be a temporary pop-up food source, so their overall habit and feeding pattern is not changed. So when the feeding happens correctly, and here in the cloud forest it happens correctly, I think the way of the feeding is neutral, again, because we are not hurting with the animals, we are not hand feeding, and we are trying to not to alter their behavior, not getting them too close when it's at night, we are not using flash for the mammals, not scaring them, etc. Now we need to see the result, and this is where I think I have a very different perspective than many other people, because the result in this case, looking at the big picture, I think it's incredibly positive. These little forests, Bella Vista, or the little forest around Birdwatcher's house, all of these places are little isolated patches of untouched forest, which are now protected. These areas are not national parks. They don't have funding from any government source or any real source other than the tourists who are coming here and paying to stay in these lodges and do nice walks in these forests. So the result of having these animals close means that you can attract tourists who will come there, stay there for the magic of seeing animal species which you can't see really any other place, or at least not this close and not this easy. And for this, the tourists are willing to pay in between $100 to $200 a night, which is enough funding for these little parks to survive. Now, these little parks are surviving in areas where you have cattle ranching all around. You can get out of Bella Vista, go 300 meters, and you will see completely bare areas with cattle on it. So most probably this is what would happen in case there are no birds, no animals to be seen easily. So the tourists will stop coming there, the land will need to be sold, and if it's sold, then all the animals are gone. So in the long run, actually, feeding these animals, if it's done in as responsible way as possible, and again, there is no perfect way, so I'm saying these are neutral ways or sometimes even a little bit negative. But if the result is that positive, that you actually protect the whole habitat where all these animals are, and trying to not to completely alter the behavior of the animals you're feeding, I think the end result and overall the feeding is rather positive than negative. Obviously, if I would have 100% purist view on this, I would say that it's terrible because we are feeding the animals and they should not be fed at all. But obviously, these animals should have the whole area, the whole region for themselves, and there should not be human habitats. There should be no cattle ranching around. There should be no new roads built and all those other things. So in reality, in this real world, at least this is a model which is obviously driven by commercial reasons. People who want to see these animals can pay and can see them, and lodges and hotels can get enough income, keep themselves running and earn some money. So at the end of the day, all people involved seem to be happy, and because of this, it is a structure which actually works. And if we can make sure that in the meantime all animals involved are as untouched as unhurt as possible and as healthy as possible, I think it's rather a positive way of feeding the wild animals. I have one more example in my mind, which I did one of my first, if not the first video ever on YouTube. It's about the bearded vultures. I've been in Ethiopia, I was hiking for days in the highlands, and I've seen some bearded vultures flying high and up, but never got to see them close. So when we got to our last camping spot, we've seen bearded vulture all day around, but it didn't come close. Now, the bearded vultures were staying close to the campsite because of the campsite and because of a little hut shack where they were preparing food all day long for the truck drivers passing by. And because these people were throwing scraps of food out, all the birds of prey and vultures were around. But on the day when we were there, the bearded vultures didn't come close. That means they didn't have big pieces of bone around. So I managed to order my local guide from town, who was coming the next day, to bring me a lot of bones, and he actually brought 20-30 kilos of bones, which we spread out on the ledge, and very shortly a bearded vulture landed very close to us. It was an incredible experience, managed to take a good footage, a good video of it, and then it left. Is this negative or positive? Obviously I asked for the food. This was maybe one of the only time when I interacted and I put the food out. But I feel that it was also more like neutral than negative. I wouldn't say it was positive, but the birds were already there because they got used to that humans leave food out. So putting out the bone did not change the general behavior of the bird, gave it a chance to have a good feed and for us to have a good look. Obviously, what's the result? I think the result is that I had a good footage, which made me happy, and I tried to share it with people. But that's why I'm saying here, the result is probably not overwhelmingly positive one, but I'm hoping that it's also not a negative one. So these cases can happen as well. Actually, on the same spot, we managed to see an Ethiopian wolf as well, without any feeding involved, just getting out of the tent in the morning and spotting one. Obviously, the rarest canine in the world was there because humans were around and looking, scavenging for human trash. So the reality there is already given. Intervening a little bit and trying to achieve something probably didn't change the big picture. And I want to go back for one of the first stories, the feeding the jaguar ones. It is a real story. It was not starting with feeding the jaguars, but actually it was an open kitchen on a ranch where they left scraps of food, and 2 juvenile jaguars started to go by and look for that food. Probably they lost their mother and they were looking for easy food. And in this case, I happened to be there. I had the amazing, incredible opportunity to observe these animals, take some pictures, videos, be meters away from the jaguars. Incredible experience, but also a very scary one. Not because I was scared for myself, but I was scared for the jaguars, because I knew if they get this close to other people, they will get hurt. So we tried to reach biologists. We were trying to find ways. How could we scare the animals away? How could we teach the animals not to get close to humans? Because in this area, around Playa del Carmen and Cancun, sadly, animal-human conflicts in between jaguars and the people on the ranch are regularly happening, and it's always ending up with the jaguars being dead. The story didn't end great. We did not get much support from authorities, and eventually the jaguars stopped coming by. We don't know what happened with them, but because they're protected animals, we were not allowed to do and interact directly in any ways. But just to show in cases where we feel that the feeding has a negative effect, we even try to intervene and do something against it. So I hope you enjoyed this very different and probably a little bit long video. If you did, as usual, do not forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's really essential to me. So click down there where you see the little icon of subscribe. And as I mentioned before on this video, I would really like you to share your opinion about the topic with me. This is a topic which really makes me think a lot. I don't have clear answers. This is my opinion after a week of thinking, but obviously I can be convinced otherwise. I'm also sure that I did not consider 1,500 different reasons and different aspects which should be and could be considered. So try to change my mind if you feel so. Explain me, tell me what you think, and I would love to start a conversation. Thank you very much again, and see you next week.